Rick Berman, the executive director of the Employment Policies Institute, thanks very much for your time. We've just seen this massive spending increase by the Biden administration on several fronts, and it looks like the employment numbers from last Friday are bearing out some of the results of that. What are your thoughts about the employment picture as of last Friday?
Well, it was depressing to see that there was only 266,000 new jobs created. And there's probably a group of people who are going to say, well, that was an anomaly because we were up to 916,000 new jobs the month before. And over the first quarter, we've averaged about 450,000 jobs a month, even going back to January when things were still very much in lockdown. My guess is that right now there are a lot of jobs not being created because a lot of businesses are suffering. They can't get employees. There's no sense in creating a job and reporting a job as being created if you can't staff it. It's probably the biggest problem facing manufacturing, facing the service industries since we've started to roll out of this pandemic.
And do you attribute these extended unemployment benefits as the single greatest cause, or are there other factors?
Well, there are three factors that people talk about more often than anything. One is people are afraid to come back to work because they're going to get sick. I don't think that's really the issue today. The second reason is that people are staying home because the schools aren't open. And if the schools aren't open, then at least women traditionally are staying home with their kids. And in fact, you see some of that evidence because the people who are filling jobs today tend to be men. So women are not entering the workforce in the same numbers that they were there before. And that's because the teachers union had continued to shut down schools. We have still less than 50% of public schools open on a full-time basis, which is ridiculous. And then the third reason, which is the one that you mentioned, I think that's the most important, and that is it pays not to go to work. The average right now is about, well, it's the equivalent of $30,000 a year, $32,000 a year if you're not working, and you don't have to hassle with transportation either. So you can work from home or you can not work at all. But the point is, people aren't going in. But the people who don't have jobs are getting paid $30,000 in some states up to $40,000, and that's a big drag on getting people back into the economy.
And this is expected to continue as it now stands until Labor Day. What's the hazard in that?
Well, the hazard is that it keeps going on. And what's even worse, Doug, is that there are still 19 states that don't require you to even look for a job. Traditionally, you don't get unemployment insurance unless you're actually unemployable. Nobody wants to offer you a job, but you have to show that you're looking. Now you got 19 states that are not even requiring that. And some are big states like Illinois and California are not making that requirement. And what's happened in that situation is that unemployment insurance, and I stress the word insurance, is designed to cushion you against, an unforeseen development. But if you can get a job, you ought to be out getting it. If you don't have to look for a job, then it's not insurance anymore. Then it's just welfare.
What is the Democratic Party's motivation in pursuing this tactic?
Well, I think it's the same issue that people complain about all the time, and that the government is just trying to see to it that there's a guaranteed wage for people. And this is a little bit of that, a guaranteed wage for people, which just appeals to so many social liberals on an economic basis. I mean, there's no logic to it because people on one hand say, oh, the value of work is so important, but then they disincentivize people to go to work.
And is there a moral hazard in this?
Well, the moral hazard is that you continue to get people being more dependent on the government rather than dependent on themselves.
Right. There's all been talk, and you've had experience in the restaurant industry. Obviously, you know how it works. Is there a risk in this that regardless of what the Democratic Party may want, that this permanent state of unemployment becomes indeed permanent because of technology, because people can be, in fact, overridden by machines, computers, technology?
Yeah, well, it's funny, in the restaurant industry or the food service industry, productivity has not gone up dramatically. I mean, over the last 30 years, average productivity increase for businesses in general has been close to 80%. In the restaurant or food service business over the last 30 years, it's gone up about 11%, which means that there's not a lot of opportunity to spend money to get rid of employees and replace them with some sort of technology. But now people are being forced into an acceleration of that idea. And so you can go to a fast food place and you can order from a kiosk. You don't have to order from an employee. You can go into a restaurant today and there's a little computer on the table. You can order off of that computer. You can pay with a credit card. You rarely see a waiter anymore. Now that's not every place, but it's growing. And that is going to do away with a lot of these entry-level jobs, which are so important for people who don't have basic skills or they can't really get into something other than a service industry position.
There's been a lot of speculation that because we're moving into this highly technical culture, a service industry, as opposed to the old factory jobs which used to exist, that we may be faced in the long-term future of a permanent kind of underclass, and that a guaranteed minimum salary may be the way to go. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it all comes down to the numbers. If you want to have a guaranteed minimum salary, you're obviously going to do away with a lot of welfare. Housing supplements, food stamp supplements are generally designed for people that have very low incomes or no income at all. Are you going to do away with Medicaid? Are you going to do away with all those other programs while at the same time you're giving some people basic money? Aside from the morality of it, aside from encouraging people not to be productive, it comes down to what's it going to cost society to do that, and is society going to put up with, as Newt Gingrich used to say, more people being in the wagon than pulling the wagon?
Right. And aside from the moral hazard of this, is there a moral risk to individual human beings who have no work in their lives?
Well, my biggest problem with that idea of giving everybody, free money, if you will, for doing nothing except being able to fog a mirror, is that it becomes intergenerational. And now the value of work gets debased. Kids no longer see their parents going to work. It's not going to happen everywhere, but it's going to happen incrementally if we continue down this path. And that's clearly a path to becoming a second world nation, because we're not going to have productivity. We're not going to have people making things. We're just going to have very few people supporting those who are staying at home, just like we see it happening now in what you might consider to be a very small example of what the bigger picture could look like. And
the Democrats are funding this with proposals for higher taxes, higher corporate taxes, higher individual rate taxes for those earning over $400,000. Your thoughts about that?
Well, obviously, people who make a lot of money can figure out ways to not have it be taxed beyond what's reasonable. When Biden says, well, people should pay their fair share, most people don't think that taking 50% of your income is fair. Even surveys that poll people who are at very low income levels, do they think that 50% of your income is fair? My guess is that you're going to disincentivize investment. My guess is that once again, we're going to find people stimulated by government policy to do something that's counterintuitive, and that is decide not to work, decide not to make as much money, decide not to make investments, decide not to take risks. When the risk is as great as a 50% tax credit is, tax bracket is, you might decide I'm not going to put my money into something that I could put into Bitcoin instead.
Right. Let's also ask about the accumulation of debt that this country is seeing right now. Do you expect that higher taxes will remedy that situation if indeed they do get passed? What are the consequences of the debt and deficit we're racking up day by day?
Well, one of the things that bothers me about the debt is that people are getting immune to the idea that we're going to exceed GDP in debt. The biggest problem with debt is debt service. You know, when we start to spend all of our tax revenue just to pay interest on the debt, then we don't have any money for the roads, for infrastructure. And it's not necessarily all money that's owed to the Chinese government or to the Japanese government. I mean, we owe a lot of it to ourselves. People buy bonds, institutions buy government debt, and the interest has to be paid on it. And, you know, sometimes you hear politicians say, every man, woman, and child in America owes $50,000 to pay off the debt, or whatever number. It's a meaningless threat because nobody thinks that the government's coming to your door and going to hand you a bill for $50,000. So people over time, I think, have decided that this is make-believe debt. Nobody has to worry about it. All the frightening stories can be discounted. Sooner or later, that piper has to be paid. And just as we see Social Security and Medicare being threatened with shortfalls, I think government spending is going to be threatened as well, with all this money going to pay off the debt. And so then you're going to have all the smart money people say, well, just cut the defense budget, or, you know, just cut something else that we actually need in this country. All of this thing suggests that it's going to end up looking worse than we are presently predicting.
And Rick, last question: when do we start paying the piper for this? Interest rates are already close to zero. No sign of them changing in the immediate future, anyway. When does inflation creep up? When do interest rates creep up?
Well, you know, you'll have to ask Mr. Powell at the Federal Reserve when that happens. You know, they might elect to keep printing more money. That, of course, is going to create more inflation. When interest rates tick up is really a function of the Federal Reserve more than anything else. But again, it can't go on forever. At some point in time, there's too much money chasing too little productivity. You're going to get inflation. And most people, you know, most adults today who are, you know, over 50 can certainly remember the Carter years when interest rates were such that you couldn't borrow. And, you know, we've seen that happen in second world countries, forgetting about third world countries. You know, I think back to Argentina, where people couldn't even buy a car or a washing machine on credit. Nobody would give you the credit because inflated money was going to be used to pay it back. And that's going to become a problem in this country if we get serious inflation again. People don't have long memories, and some people don't have any memory because they're too young, but it's a problem.
Rick Berman, Executive Director of the Employment Policies Institute, thanks very much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Doug.